Welcome to the Global Marketing Show, where we explore how language and culture impact global business. I'm Wendy Pease, your host and president of Rapport International. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Global Marketing Show. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce Trevor Williams, who's from Atlanta. I'm recording here up in Massachusetts near Boston. And so we do have a tidbit that brings out the cultural differences between the North and the South of the United States. So Rapport International provides high quality written translation, spoken interpretation in over 200 languages, and they provide us a tidbit every time. Today's is about sarcasm. And sarcasm as a form of humor can be found in every culture and language, but the context and the content of sarcasm does differ between countries. Its use even differs between regions within a country. For example, I was talking about the North and the South. In the U.S., only 35% of Southerners enjoy sarcasm, as opposed to 56% of Northerners. So I don't know how they measure it, but there seems to be a statistically significant difference there. So Trevor Williams is the managing director at Global Atlanta, where he tells stories to make the world less confusing for people. He's in a good role for his strengths since he's always been fascinated by people's belief systems and how they make their way in the world, and by the power of international travel and engagement to challenge our own biases and beliefs and ultimately strengthen relationships. At Global Atlanta, they report on global business as a means to connect across cultures and break down barriers through the power of economic integration. So, Trevor, it sounds like you've done a lot of international travel or international business. Welcome to the show, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Wendy. Appreciate it. And I like the point about sarcasm. I don't know. They say we're a little bit slower paced and nicer down here. I don't know if that's true or not. So we'll determine it by the end of the conversation, maybe.
We'll have to throw some nice jokes or some sarcasm in,
right.
whichever way it goes.
Yeah. And I will say I'm probably in the less sarcastic category. So maybe we're exemplifying those statistics today. I'm not sure. But so Global
to be honest, I'm not much of it. Sarcasm can sometimes be mean. So
you're
I tend
in the 43%. In the North there. Global Atlanta, as you mentioned, is a news publication focused on international business mainly, but really how Atlanta as a city. And I appreciate that you said Atlanta, not Atlanta, because some people put the T in there and we don't say the T. But so you obviously did your homework there. But
well, my brother lives in Atlanta, so I've been down there enough, but I didn't even realize I was doing it.
Yeah. Well, particularly when you're talking to folks from overseas, right? They want to be proper, and especially speakers of, new speakers of English or those for whom it's the second language, they often put the Atlanta, especially Latin Americans, right? Because in Spanish, you're going to say the T for sure.
Right.
But so we look at Atlanta as a city and how it's grown as an international hub, not only for business, but also for culture, education, diplomacy. And we really look at this intersection between the city and the world. And it makes us a little bit unique as a publication. It started off more than almost 35 years ago, and I'm happy to talk more about the origins of the publication. But personally, I've been here for 18 years. I studied journalism at the University of Georgia, and Chinese as a minor, and also religions. That's where this sort of fascination with the way people think and believe came from. Or maybe it was there before and I just made it into a degree.
Got you interested in international relations and business?
I always say that I'm kind of the target audience for our publication in that I did not grow up with a very international background. And so, there's a sense in which if you are doing what we do and kind of helping knit together the international community, it would be very easy for us to only deal with people who are either from other countries or have traveled extensively, but really we see ourselves as trying to help bring along those that have less exposure potentially. And in that way, I'm the target audience because, like I always say, my mom still does not have a passport. We never traveled anywhere, growing up except to maybe Tennessee a couple times and California to see my aunt. But no international travel. So I was coming at it completely new in college. I had an opportunity as a budding writer to go to Jordan on a trip that was really facilitated by a mentor that I'd had. And so that really opened my eyes to the world. 2 months later, went to China with another mentor who was living there. So those two experiences, and happy to talk more about it, but I don't want to take up all your time. Those two experiences really opened my eyes. And I think you could either retreat or you could dive in. And I kind of did the latter.
So when you're talking about the people that you help without experience, I mean, that's fascinating because most people I talk to or interview had some early exposure to international language, either family or travel or something like that. So that's so fascinating that you did jump at the opportunity and then make a life out of it. So why should people export or get involved with global business?
Yeah. Well, I think one way to think about that is why is the U.S. not more trade oriented? And I think there are good reasons and excuses maybe for that. One is that the U.S. is obviously the largest consumer market in the world. So if you're someone doing business in Georgia, right, it's pretty easy to make a living without exporting your product. You can sell to Alabama and South Carolina and Tennessee and all these other places. You don't really feel like you have to cross borders and take on all that complexity. And maybe you haven't had that exposure, and therefore you see it as potentially more complicated than it actually is. So I think that lack of familiarity often hinders people, and then just the lack of exposure. And so these are the types of things we're trying to remedy through the publication, to let people know how exposed or how connected they already are. We often say we're not creating anything. It's just all there and we're illuminating it, if that makes sense. So I think we're more internationally connected than we think we are. So that's the first point. But in terms of why should you do it, I think every business is different. Maybe some should not. And I think those that are involved in this sort of cottage industry of export promotion and international trade will tell you that you have to really make sure that you're ready for it. At the same time, there are a couple of different reasons. One is it exposes you to innovative new methods and ideas. I've heard countless stories and reported on countless stories where companies have entered a new market and have found a different way to do something, and they brought that back to their country of origin or their local operation. I think this.
Could you give us a good example of that?
Yeah, that's I don't have a specific example top of mind, but a lot of companies will say that like they take innovations from their various markets and kind of move them around and localize them in different places. So, I mean, an easy one would be like all the fast food restaurants, right? Like we have a huge franchising sector here in Georgia, obviously the home of Chick-fil-A, Church's / Texas Chicken, some other brands. But that's the explicit example, right? Like they'll create a flavor that's for tastes in Singapore or something, and then they'll say, "Oh, that actually was very well received. Is there a way to kind of bring that back into our market?" But yeah,
there's one that I think of that I heard about with Pepperidge Farm cookies. They had a bunch of Spanish-speaking people that were there from Central or South America, and they said, how come the Latinos aren't buying? And they said, well, you don't have our favorite flavor, the strawberry flavor. So they started creating those and saw their sales skyrocket within those cultures. So
another good example is in financial technology. That's a sector I've written about a lot. So you'll see like, in certain markets, there are solutions that are tailored to that particular area. Like, you have kind of things like pay on demand for wages, right? Like for salaries. So people getting immediate access to the the wages that they've already worked to earn. Whereas here it'd be like a 2-week period, before you get paid. Now some companies have adopted this, like, we can either give you a loan against what you've already made, or we can actually give you access to your salary. And that's something that's pretty commonplace in other parts of the world. Like, you may get paid, either you get paid monthly or you get paid like almost daily, right? So those kinds of cross-pollination opportunities, I think, happen a lot in the financial world. There's a African company I just ran across that's doing buy now, pay later, right? You've seen Affirm and Klarna and all these platforms that have sprung up to feed our consumer habit. Well, it's basically like layaway, like we used to do back in the old days. But they're doing remit now, pay later, which is, sending international remittances back to your home country. So say you're a Nigerian living in the US and you want to, send money back home, you can actually send money before you have the money. And then you're basically borrowing against what you're going to earn and sending that now versus waiting until you get paid. And so it's a hybrid,
making it easy to send money home too, because that's always been so difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's all kind the financial technology world is replete with those kinds of examples. But, there's one company doing stable coins attached to the US dollar and using that for remittances back to Africa. So there's a lot of cool products and services that are being created by this fusion of ideas. So that's another reason for exporting. I think the other one I would say just quickly is diversification, right? I mean, a lot of companies saw, particularly in the financial crisis of the late 2000s or aughts or whatever, however you call it, that if they had exposure to other markets, then they were somewhat shielded or more shielded from the downturn in the U.S. And that's been true in other countries that have, if you're selling to 50 countries, right, and one goes down, you've still got 49 markets left. I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but people say, exporting companies tend to pay better and be more resilient during downturns and hire more people. We were given a national award for our work with exporters and like using our information to kind of help facilitate that business. And that's the story that we've been told through all this interaction with export promotion organizations, I guess. So, but I always think that may be a correlation rather than a causation, that if you're already exporting, it may be self-selecting for people that are more resilient and healthier as a company already. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. The kind of the chicken or the egg.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
also, it makes your life interesting, by the way. That's my top one. It makes your life more interesting. Now, in business, it's not always good to have an interesting life, but personally, I've seen a lot of relationships created through international business, and you get to go to these trade shows and you interact with your clients personally, people that you've been doing business with from afar, and it makes for a rich and interesting life, I think, for people.
Talking about interesting, as we're recording this, there's a lot going on in the global markets with tariffs and logistics issues and all that. Talk to me about what you see going on in global trade and where you think we're going to be in a year from now.
Yeah, I'd be getting paid a lot more if I knew the answer to that. But I think the general buzzword is uncertainty, right? I mean, everybody is facing the same problem, that you don't know what your cost structures are going to be. You're seeing investments being either accelerated or delayed, I think, depending on what stage people are in. So what I keep hearing is that the companies that are already in the final or close to final stages of an investment, especially in the South or in the U.S., they tend to be speeding up because the quicker they can localize their production, the quicker they can decrease their exposure to tariffs, if that makes sense. And the story in the South, as you may or may not know, is that we're a huge manufacturing region now, particularly in the automotive sector and aerospace and some other key industries. Because of that, like, this region has been very exposed to particularly some of the tariffs on steel and aluminum and the cars and car parts. So there's been a lot of activity to try to figure out whether to speed up or slow down. So I think if you've already selected your site, you've already allocated your capital, like you're going to go ahead and speed up that investment so that you can be in the U.S. and eliminate some of that uncertainty. If you are looking 3 years down the road, you're going to stop and not do anything for now because, you don't know what your cost structures are going to be in the next 6 months even. So I was just in Japan. Our governor was in Japan. There was a big Japanese conference, and the Trump was in Japan at the same time, and so it was very fascinating to hear how there was a new Japanese prime minister, and Japan is heavily invested in the Southeast U.S. I think it's close to 1,500 companies employing hundreds of thousands of people. In Georgia alone, there's 300 to 400 Japanese companies employing 40,000 people. And so these companies are, they're facing the kind of contradiction in terms of what the U.S. is trying to accomplish, because we say that we're trying to get companies to manufacture locally, which is what a lot of them are doing. I mean, most foreign cars that are sold in the U.S. are not made outside the U.S. They're made in either the U.S. or the NAFTA region, former NAFTA region. And so they're fulfilling what we say we want them to do, and yet they're still facing on their inputs these huge tariffs on parts and steel and everything that they're bringing in from other parts of the world. It's fascinating to be there at a time when all that was thought to be shaking out, and that they were getting a little bit more clarity on what the tariff rate is going to be in just this one market. But that, to me, is an example, I think, of just how uncertain it is. If we're talking about this major ally that's already invested tens of billions of dollars in the country, or hundreds, and we're still making it challenging for them, then it stands to reason that it's going to be even that much more challenging for other countries that are not allied with us. So I think a lot of people are just taking a wait and see approach and seeing how things shake out. But that said, people are not just wringing their hands. I mean, that's one thing I love about reporting on business. We do a lot on international affairs, and in that realm, there's more theory and there's more questioning and hand-wringing and discussion, whereas business people are very pragmatic. They're like, well, these are the rules for today. Let's figure out what we're going to do. And they're not sitting around. They're making strategies and trying to mitigate impacts as much as possible. But it's been really challenging for people.
Yeah. So do you have any stories of business owners or companies that are doing that, how they're moving forward? Have you heard of some good ideas that we might be able to learn from?
Yeah, I think every business is so different. Every industry is so different. It's hard to universalize. I mean, I think it's that time frame thing is really important, like what stage you're in. I do think that a lot of companies are learning how to be politically savvy now, and that business, national security, politics, these things are all intertwined in ways that maybe they weren't in previous years. So you'll see announcements of things that maybe were already in the works, but they're timed, in a different way to be announced, say while the president is in Japan, or while the governor is traveling somewhere. And that's always been part of the game. It's always been somewhat political. But in terms of mitigation of risk and tariffs, I mean, I was at a Swedish event this morning, and they were talking a lot about the use of foreign trade zones, for instance, that these kind of obscure tools of international trade that people didn't know about before. Now they're becoming more commonplace and mainstream. So foreign trade zones, if you don't know, are a place where you can bring in your goods, your raw materials and parts and whatnot, do assembly, and not face a tariff until you sell and re-export out of there. So if you're bringing in your inputs, say your steel parts that are going to go into the car, you don't have to pay that tariff until that value add is done and the parts are sent out. So there are companies that are using third-party logistics providers to do that, but now more and more companies are bringing that in-house and actually having their facility designated as a foreign trade zone to potentially mitigate the costs, or defer the costs until they're actually making the sale. And then a lot of companies have stocked up. So this is why I think you have seen like less impact of tariffs on inflation, things like that so far, is because you've had a lot of companies that have imported more stock to get ahead of the tariffs. And that's enabled them to when they're stocking more inventory, they can, sell out more before they have to import more, if that makes sense.
I had wondered why, with the tariffs that I'd been hearing about and the business owners that I see trying to price, that's what it is.
Well, some are eating the costs and not passing it on,
Yeah.
right, to their customers. And then, Trump famously told Walmart to eat the costs, right? And some are doing that, particularly if they see if they see it as temporary, then they don't want to raise the price, and kind of ruin that relationship with the customer unless they absolutely have to. And some of them are just providing that as like a surcharge where they say, hey, this is a 20% tariff surcharge or whatever. Like that we'll remove this as soon as the tariffs go back to normal, but we're passing this on for now. So instead of like explicitly increasing the price, they'll keep the price the same and then just put a 20%, whatever the tariff rate is, on top of that. And then there are lots of elaborate ways to reclassify your goods legally, of course, and that could be, you could have to do a certain like amount of transformation in a different market before it comes to the U.S., but you can potentially do that, and like the difference between it being a medical device and a medical component, I don't know, technically, like those kind of little distinctions, if you know the harmonized codes and tariffs and all that, like you can actually finagle that stuff to really reduce your exposure as well. So, and the problem there is that I'm hearing from a lot of companies is that we don't have the critical mass of people that are really well versed in trade compliance for companies to be able to recruit, so a lot of that's been falling on either attorneys or the third-party logistics providers and freight forwarders and things like that. So those kind of groups are doing great business because they actually know how to manage these things, and they've become in very high demand.
Yeah, we've had a couple of people that do trade compliance on the podcast, so I don't know whether to send people to those episodes or those people are already swamped, but that's another resource to go look at some of our earlier. And it's so detailed. I mean, it is so detailed and in depth that you've got to be able to figure out and then make sure you're following the law.
Yeah, the good thing is that, especially when you talk about exporting, importing is maybe a little different, but there's so many resources out there for people. And the U.S. Commerce Department has a ton. I'm on what's called the District Export Council here in Georgia. So I'm on that group that's Commerce Department sort of sanctioned, group to help advise people on exports. There's grants that are available to help people go to trade shows and build markets around the world. We have a unique program called the Metro Export Challenge here that the Chamber of Commerce does and provides $5,000 grants for people to go out into the world and prospect for business. U.S. Commercial Service has all these resources around the world. So, it can be de-risked quite a bit if you really want to. And it's just about getting above the fray and looking around and not trying to do it on your own. That's the key point.
Right. There is. So I sit on the District Export Council here in Massachusetts. So I didn't realize you were on the Atlanta
cool.
one.
Yeah.
And then the grants you were talking about oftentimes can be used for translation too.
For sure.
To take me into culture and language, what do you see in that area? I know you're passionate about belief systems and cultures and language. So what do you see? Tell me about your passion, your insights.
Well, I studied Chinese, and I think you're quickly confronted with your own ignorance when you put yourself in a position to learn a new language, and that can be a scary feeling, or it can be empowering in some ways, because the more you realize your own ignorance, the more you can kind of be impressed with how far you've come, I guess. and I'm still not great at Chinese, but I can kind of survive when I travel somewhere. So it gives you this sense of achievement and accomplishment. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the ultimate gesture of humility to try to put yourself on the same playing field with those that you're visiting and trying to learn about. And I've seen it open so many doors, whether it's just a smile and a ni hao, or it's something more deep than that. It really changes the tenor of the interaction with the person. That you're putting yourself in their hands, right, instead of expecting something from them. And I think, particularly with Americans, like the general stereotype is that we are going to expect you to speak English, even when we're in your country. and I've definitely seen that, and definitely seen the ugly American stereotype played out multiple times on multiple trips. But I think the thing that, and maybe that leads to a little bit of a double standard, right? Like people maybe are weirdly kind of more impressed that you put the effort in because you're an American. And that's kind of weird too, because you're like, well, I'm not that great at Chinese, but why are you gushing so much about me actually trying to speak Chinese? Like you should expect more of me,
Right.
And maybe that's different if you're in Asia or if you're in a place like Europe. But yeah, I think it really does change the interaction with the person you're trying to deal with. And you learn a lot about, you learn about how people learn to speak English in a different way. If you know a little bit of their language, you know why they say things in English a certain way. So it helps you with empathy and understanding on that front. And then, it helps you realize that you're not the center of the world. 96% of people in the world live outside the U.S. And I think because of our economic centrality, we have this idea that we are the center of the universe. And when you put yourself in that framework of learning from another culture through language, then you quickly are disabused of the notion that you are that important. So, and the places I've spent the most time, particularly China, like these are, China and India is more recently. I've been going there more. And it's those two countries are 40% of the world, right? So, or close to it, at least 30. And so, and they're continents in themselves and very diverse and very different depending on where you are. And things can be true and untrue at the same time. And the experts, are often somewhat ignorant, or maybe if not ignorant, arrogant, to think that they understand these places. And so I always tell people, if you think you are an expert in China, like if you say you're an expert on China, like if you say that about yourself, there's a very good chance you don't know very much. Because I think people that have been to these places and understand them more, understand that the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, if that makes sense. And that I think is where language is important, because it really quickly reveals how little you know. And that doesn't have to be scary, I don't think. I think that can be an opportunity.
Right. That you don't have to learn everything as long as you stay open to learning from it. Yeah.
I mean, I think, the only way you learn is to be ignorant, right? Like learning is curing your ignorance. And so if you can admit that and embrace it, like you end up learning more. And the best words, the words that you remember the best in another language are the ones where you've made the most embarrassing mistake, if that makes sense. Those are the ones you commit like more deeply to memory. I remember.
Share. Do you have some of those?
Well, telling someone that I met my wife in traffic instead of church, that was one. And then, doing the blessing before a meal and praying. My friend who was a missionary in China, prayed to the pig Jesus instead of the Lord Jesus because of the tonal change in the word. Zhu. Zhu is pig, but Zhu is Lord or master. And so, you just change the tone, you change the meaning. So I always remember the pig Jesus and and some others like that. But that's the stuff you remember,
It is. You'll know that tone from now on.
Yeah. And you have to be open to that kind of embarrassment, embarrassment again in quotes, but like to learn a language. And
Right.
I was just in Japan and I was getting some ramen and I didn't know, it's not even language. It's like, I didn't even know how to order, right? Like, where do I go? Which kiosk do I go to? Do I keep the receipt or and I'm never going to forget that process now because I accidentally threw the receipt away. And then the guy's like wanting me to hand it to him. And I had to dig it out of the trash and hand it to the guy, which, in Japan is just like a big faux pas, right? And so I was on a tour bus on a previous trip to Japan and the tour guide was describing why you should take your shoes off, and before you go into a Japanese home or a temple or whatnot. And he said something which it's always stuck with me that I think Japanese people probably do way more than they let on. But he said, outside we will be smiling, inside we will be screaming. And like if you leave your shoes on. And I was like, there must be so much internal screaming going on in Japan when we visit. But
oh yeah.
But the more you understand that, you try to make up for it in other ways with humility and smiling and whatnot. And you're always going to be ignorant, never going to be a native, but you do your best and people appreciate the effort.
Yeah, I just had an interesting learning lesson that I guess it's in Germany. I don't know if it's all in Europe because I just became aware of it. But the toilet bowl cleaners are next to all the toilets because you're expected to clean the toilet if you make a mess in it. Like never leave it. Where in the U.S. you'd never think of doing that.
To your point, that's like the thing about you talk about exporting or doing international business. Like when you're exposed to things like that, you think about what's your responsibilities to society, and if it's a company, what kind of culture should we create? It may not be the general culture of the U.S., but could we adopt some of that consideration of, say, German or Japanese companies into our thinking? And I just went to a seminar where they were reporting on like workforce trends with Japanese companies in the U.S. and one of the speakers said she used to work for a Japanese company and work started at 8, but you're expected to be there at 7:45 a.m. to clean the office before work started, right? You're not just rolling in there at 8 o'clock. You're like, everybody gets there and cleans the office together before you start. And I love that, I love that sense of consideration.
That's a common thing in the schools in Japan too. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing about that. So it's part of the culture.
Yeah, it's the collectivist versus individualist thing, right? Yeah. But and each side has its own benefits and drawbacks, right? So and they can learn from us just like we can learn from them. But I think when you open yourself up to that, then your ability to learn just goes much higher.
So you said earlier that Global Atlanta helps people find connections and be more connected. Can you say more about that, about how you've done that or how you focus on doing that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so news is really, at its core, if you look at what newspapers do or, what role they play in the community, they really are kind of a glue that connects the community and through information. And so that's kind of how we see ourselves in the international business landscape here. We kind of help reveal what's going on so that people can connect and transact and ultimately not just be transactional, but be connected and be mutually reinforcing and in their networks. And so it kind of goes back to our founder who started the publication in the early 1990s. He had been a journalist internationally, writing for a credit card publication in France. But before that, he had been a local journalist here in Georgia, starting on the police beat and kind of moving up from there. And so he kind of understood the power of sharing information and to build networks and also the importance of this local connection. And the importance of, international business. So he kind of blended those things when he created Global Atlanta. But he often, what he drilled into me, his name's Phil Bolton. He drilled into me this idea of like, Responsibility to the community, I think, is one thing. And also, in terms of the content, he always wanted it to be actionable. That's the word he always used. He's like, it's the old news you can use kind of thing. It's like, you should be able to read a Global Atlanta story and go do something with it. And it's not just information for its own sake, but it's for the purpose of helping people take action, whether that's reaching out to make a new friend or whether it's, doing a business deal. And he used to put, he kind of says it was almost a joke back in the early 90s, but he would put phone numbers and fax numbers in the publication. And he said he saw it kind of as a proto LinkedIn,
Right.
like, if he's interviewing a guy in Beijing at a law firm, like he'll put the Beijing phone number in there. And he's like, I don't know if anybody ever did anything with it. It was kind of like tongue in cheek, nobody's going to call Beijing. But then, 10, 15 years later, it looked pretty smart. And now it's just table stakes. Anybody can connect anywhere. And
Right.
so we've still kept that bent, I think. And we've taken that to another level in terms of events. So we've got all this institutional knowledge, all this information, most of which never ends up in the publication. So, you go to an event, you report on it, 90% of what you hear doesn't get written. It's in here, but it's not out on the page.
Right.
And so we found that we had this benefit of a panoramic view, and we should bring more of that to bear for not only our readers but our sponsors and advertisers and as well. So we started doing events and kind of ramped up our role as a convener in the community, not just an observer. And so it kind of takes that actionable bent that we've always had and brings it into the real world and helps people physically connect and do business.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check out your website. Where could people go if they wanted to see the events that you're hosting?
Yeah, so a unique thing about us is we are both hosting our own events, but then we're also, again, this is something we've done for a very long time before we even started doing our own things. We aggregate a calendar for the city. So we have probably the most comprehensive international business calendar that you can find in Atlanta is on our site at globalatlanta.com/events. So you'll see a list of, all the binational chambers of commerce, or that's like the French American Chamber, German American Chamber, Brazilian American Chamber, all these groups. We put them all in the same place. They all have their own independent websites and events and their own independent memberships. But we pride ourselves in putting all that together where, if you're a new arrival to Atlanta or if you're somebody who's been here forever and you want a more global view on what's going on in our world, then you can come to our site and kind of get that panorama. So we have that, and then our events are integrated into that. So we're doing, for instance, an event right now on Thursday with the Brazilian Consul General here in Atlanta. We're doing we call it consular conversations. So we do a monthly series with different diplomats. We talk to them about their role and what they're doing in Atlanta and what's happening in their country at the moment, how people can connect and do business. And that's Brazil's our featured country for this month. But that event will show up in a stream of hundreds of other events that are happening in the city.
Oh, okay. So I'm talking about the international consultants at the Georgia SBDC about coming down in the beginning of next year to do an event. So it'll probably be posted on Global Atlanta.
Yeah, and that's always free. We'll keep that free. And there are ways you can advertise if you want, but we've really, I think, through just sheer persistence, have been either other people have given up or we've been good at it. I'm not sure, maybe a little bit of both, but just the consistency of posting those things and being present at those events, I think has been helpful for the community.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear you do that. We are running out of time, and I still have a list of questions that I can ask you.
Sure.
So we'll hold those till next time. But you know that I always ask this question towards the end of the interview
Hmm.
because you've been forewarned.
Hmm.
What are your favorite foreign words? And I'm going to say words because I know you mentioned you had three of them, so I'm excited to hear them.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking through this. Maybe I didn't give it enough thought, but I had a couple that just sprung to mind immediately. One is I really like the word. I like just deconstructing, words, especially in Chinese because that's the one I've studied, but in Spanish a little bit. But deconstructing like the literal meanings of things and how we translate them. So I really like this word xiangxin in Chinese, which means like to believe in something or to trust something. And that's the word
Hmm.
you use when you're talking about faith, right? Do you xin something? Do you trust something? And I like the idea of it being trust versus belief because I think when you think of belief, you think of intellectual pursuit, and when you think of trust, you think of a heart reliance. And I like that the sense that word brings out a different type of meaning for belief, even in English, if you literally translate it. And then this next one goes back to my religion degree there, and I'm sorry I'm butchering the Arabic, but it's dhikr. It's dhikr, and it's a practice in like Sufism and Islam, Sufi Islam. That's remembrance. It's kind of a prayer or meditation, and there's often like it's often accompanied by like an actual kind of physical motion. And I like the idea of prayer being remembering God. Like that concept often like spoke to me, I guess, when I learned it, because I think we think of prayer as talking to God versus like connecting with God. So I liked that the idea that
So
it
is
made me
that like
think
a,
differently.
yeah, is it like a noun or a verb?
It's
How
a
would you,
noun. I think, but
okay,
you would be like doing this practice. And
okay.
yeah, so it's like a noun, but you'd be
So I'm
like
going to
performing it. Yeah,
decur. So it's kind
dhikr.
of like
Yeah,
I'm going to pray. Decur.
yeah. I don't even know if you would call it prayer, but I think
No, I'm just translating
yeah,
it in
yeah,
a
yeah.
loose sense.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a practice of remembrance, I guess you would say, or meditation, kind of. Yeah, I liked that just because of the way it made me think differently about that practice. And then
Right.
the one I've heard recently, which I thought was very just kind of fun. I was in Taiwan with a group of reporters from around the world, and there was one from the Marshall Islands, and he was saying that their greeting, Yokwe, in their Marshallese language, Yokwe, means you are a rainbow. And I just thought that was so sweet. Everybody was like melting about this Marshallese greeting. So, and just the idea, I don't know what the significance is of the rainbow in Marshallese or Pacific Island culture, but it sounds very nice, and I think it's acknowledging the humanity of the other person that you're speaking with and their importance. So at least that's what I took from it. So I like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Yokwe. And then the Chinese word was Shangxi. Is that how you say it?
Xiangxin, yeah.
Shangxin. Okay.
Xiangxin, yeah. Xin is to trust something. Xin. Xiang means like mutual, and I think that's maybe the literal translation of it. But yeah, and I like that idea too of like there being a complementary trust, and when you're believing in something. So if you deconstruct these words, the fun one in Chinese that I always remember is computer, which is diannao, which is electric brain. So like there's a dian in front of a lot of things that are electrical. But that one was always a fun one to me to remember. Oh,
Yeah,
here's my
that
electric.
is,
I'm going to work with my electric brain today.
which we can't live
And
without.
the literal stuff can be dangerous, as you know, but
Oh,
like
yeah.
sometimes it does help you remember what the meaning of the word is.
Yeah, over this past year, I've been asked a lot as owner of a translation company, is AI going to put you out of business? And right here, you've just given me three examples, three definite examples that AI would never capture the meaning of.
Yeah.
Electric brain, maybe they could take the characters and put computer because it might be
Oh
used
yeah. Yeah.
enough. But
Yeah.
if it's out of context, it can be a big challenge.
And Chinese has enough idioms. I mean, AI will get good enough to know the idioms too, but you lose the beauty of it.
You lose the beauty and you lose the cultural implications, just like, sarcasm, the difference in the North and South. Like I always joke, you can't say somebody's wicked smart, because smart is the New England accent.
That's
and
right.
Wicked is a Southern term. So it's confusing. So Trevor, where can people reach you if they want to learn more about Global Atlanta or reach out to you directly?
Yeah, you can just find me on globalatlanta.com. I'm still writing most of the stuff there, so you can always just click on my name there and you'll find ways to reach me there. You can subscribe to our newsletters. They're all free. So if you're interested in Atlanta or international trade or investment, then it's a good place to go. And then personally, I mean, I'm always available on LinkedIn as well. I think you have my LinkedIn link, and if you want to publish that, you're welcome to as well.
Okay, so we'll put all that in the show notes, but that's globalatlanta.com or LinkedIn. It's Trevor, Trevor Williams. And so we'll put it in the show notes, but in case you're listening, definitely worth reaching out to connect. Well, thank you.
That's good.
Shesheni. Thank you. That's Chinese for thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all your insights.
不用谢. That means no need to thank, you're welcome. Literally. All right. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you having me. And if I can be useful in some other way, let me know. I'm happy to help.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Global Marketing Show. We started this podcast to capture the stories of people who do global marketing and work for companies that export, since those companies have higher revenues, higher profits, higher valuations, higher salaries, and more stability, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And if you know somebody who would be a good guest, introduce them to me, your host, Wendy Mackenzie Peeves. If you'd like to learn more about global marketing or language translation and interpretation, visit Rapport International's Resource Center at www.rapport translations.com. Au revoir. Hasta luego. Ciao for now.